Let's make sure we're on. Excellent. We're all good to go. I wonder if you ever stop to think if the stuff that you do is weird. Might be a strange way to start this, but I think about the things that take up my time, and I wonder if they're weird. Cricket, for example. I stand outside all day and wait for a ball to come to me, and when it comes to me, I throw it. I try and stop it first, and I throw it in, and then I wait most of that day for the ball to come again. That's how I spend Saturdays. And if I'm not waiting for a ball to come to me, then the following Saturday I'll sit under a pergola and wait for my turn to bat. And I'm sort of hoping that my teammates will get out so that I get to have a turn, but I'd also like them not to get out because I'd like us to win the game. And then I get out, and then I go and sit down and I wait for the rest of the game to go on. And I pay money to do that. There's strange things we do. Maybe it's because of tradition, maybe it's because we enjoy things, maybe it's because we've never stopped to think they are weird. But because we understand the context of the thing we are doing, we enjoy it, and the strangeness of it gets put to one side. We understand how that works in the context, and that's why we enjoy it. I can tell you all about my favorite computer games, but if you don't know anything about it, you think it's crazy that I like to spend time playing computer games. I can explain to you the ins and outs of it, and you'd think, wow, why is he doing this? If you love golf and you start to tell someone how you like to walk around a big open space and you hit a small ball closer to a small hole for about 5 hours, that sounds weird. That doesn't sound like something you'd love to spend time doing. If you said to someone, oh, I got to spend 5 hours prepping and cooking this piece of meat and it tasted delicious, but someone could cook that in 20 minutes, well, that seems weird. Why would you spend all your time doing that? And I think a lot of this is got to do with where we invite people into the conversation about what we enjoy doing. Quite often, I think instead of inviting people into the first step of something, we invite them in on a third, fourth, or fifth step. And then wonder why they don't immediately love the thing that we love. How can you not love sitting down for 7 hours, 5 days in a row to chase a ball around? That's clearly the best. But if I invite you into it there, it's actually not strange that you don't find that as enjoyable as I do. This is true as well for the greatest story ever told. It is something that we love to tell people about, something we love to share, the gospel, the message of Jesus. But sometimes if you join in halfway through, it can be something that is completely unbelievable. And the passages that we are about to look at can easily fall into this category. One, because it seems outrageous that you would ask anyone of such a standard. And the other, because it's about a glowing man and men hearing the voice of God. And that can seem unbelievable. So if you open up to Matthew 16, we'll pick up from verse 24. It says this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels. And then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly, I tell you, some of you standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. So from the outside, if you've just heard someone speak like this, I wonder if you'd jump on board and want to get involved straight away, if it's something that excites you. If you just heard this randomly, I wonder what you'd think. To me, I see things like this radical following, this call to something so high, and if you have no idea, it can sound like something cultish. It's what people are called to in cults in a lot of ways. If you pick up from here, there are some heavy things to deal with. But the context of the larger story and the character of Jesus, if we know those things, does this seem unreasonable? If we know who Jesus is, if we know what he has promised and what he has been doing in the previous 15 chapters, does this kind of thing seem unreasonable? If Jesus did perform the miracles we've heard about so far in Matthew, if he had the answers to so many of the naysayers, and if he continued to prove himself to be God's son, does he have the right to call people to this kind of radical discipleship? What Jesus has begun to set in motion in chapter 16 is the idea that if you follow him, you have to understand where he is going and what he is going to do, and that is the death and resurrection. This story in which we see a comparison to the gates of Hades and the transfiguration shortly of Jesus, this is really where the story shifts gears for Jesus and his disciples. Up until now, we have seen miracles. We've seen Jesus' personal ministry, and he's been getting around and getting things done. But now Jesus actually starts to expand on what he is going to do, what's about to happen, and what he is going to call his disciples to. And as we saw last week, that was a bit uncomfortable for some. And as Paul said this morning during communion, it was really great to hear that about Peter, because the question is, how often do we do the exact same thing? If you had journeyed with Jesus, if you had seen what he had been doing and experienced it for yourself, it would be easy to believe that the story wasn't going to end in the way that he is going to say, that he was going to die. So as we look at this, what we get to see is 3 points from this passage here that really sums up quite poetically what Jesus is to expect from his followers. And they're these. First of all, he says, take up your cross. Second, he asks, what is your soul worth? And third, he lets them know that the Son of Man will return. So first off, take up your cross and follow me. What does this even mean? Because it is a bit of a classic Christian trope. It's a bit of Christianese that we do like to throw around. If in doubt, you can sort of say this one, and hopefully people get what you're saying. And I think people do smile and nod, but I think a lot of the time this is something that we don't really get. We just say we get. I know for me early on it certainly was the case. Jesus is essentially saying, if you want to be one of my followers, stop doing whatever you want. That's not actually how you live anymore. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. That's not some kind of strange death pact or anything like that. What it means is if Jesus is in fact the Son of God, then the only way to the Father and eternity is through him. And then if you want to save your own life, if you want to live your own way and do your own thing, don't be surprised when at the end of the day you actually lose the ultimate thing God has promised us, which is eternity with him. You see these stories we have read of Jesus and come to a conclusion that says, you know what, this must be the Son of God. Then you give up your old way, your old life. You lose your old ways. And the good news of that is you will find new life in Jesus. Now again, this doesn't mean that you literally die. But what it does mean is you find a new way of living. It means you find a new life. The things that you used to find your identity in, they will start to fade away. The stuff you used to measure yourself by, well, they don't really hold a candle to the promise of the resurrection. You start to find that this community of Christians is actually really great. That the assurance of eternity is something worth living and sharing with others. It can be easy to see this as a confronting or strange passage in the way it talks about losing life. But what it really starts to show us is at the end of the day, when all is said and done, there are only two ways to live. We get two options. We can live with or without Jesus. Jesus tells us that one leads to a life lost and the other to a life found. And this is something really powerful for us to grapple with, because Jesus isn't only focused on this life. He has always had his eyes set on the life to come, and we should too. It follows up with this question: what is your soul worth? It's not something I spend too much time thinking about, but it is a big question, and I think it's a big question because in all the greatest literature in history, the biggest price the hero or the anti-hero can pay is their soul. How often do we hear that? It'll cost your soul. Historically, we understand the idea that someone's soul is inherently important and something we cannot put a price on. which makes it all the more painful to the author of your soul when you do. When we throw aside all we are worth for some temporary highs, that must hurt the one who created us. Leif has just started being politely rebellious. He says, "No thank you lots." And it's really nice, but when we tell him what's for dinner, he thinks we're giving him an option. And he'll say, "No thank you." So, well, no, that's what we're having for dinner. And it's quite disheartening because we know that that's a really good dinner. We know that that's actually what he needs. That's what's healthy and that's what's good for him. But he would prefer to have cake and chips. Or when we say, "Hey, let's go outside and play," he'll say, "No thank you, TV." We know that getting outside and running around and having a good time with mum and dad is a much better option than just sitting in front of the TV all afternoon. It means we get outside, he gets to run around, he gets to be active, he gets to get out some of that energy. And again, that can be disheartening for us. In such an immeasurably bigger way, when God shows us Jesus and shows us the narrow path to eternity, it must blow his mind when we trade our soul for short-term temptations in this life. This isn't me saying that we need to live boring lives while we're on earth or anything like that. As Christians, we actually get to live really great, really adventurous lives that are full of joy and wonder and creativity, full of friendship, full of all those great things. The Christian life is anything but boring. And as we look back on what Jesus has been speaking about, how that compares to the world, our friends, or even as we read in earlier on in this passage, what the Pharisees and Sadducees are carrying on about, we are once again given this picture that there are two ways to live. One way leads to eternity, and the other way leads to destruction. And finally, we read that the Son of Man will return. Because if he wasn't going to return, then all of this would be a bit mute, and this would just be a really strange thing to read. When Jesus says he will reward each person according to what they have done, it is easy to think that means he will judge you on how well you've lived your life. Have you been a good person? Have you done good things? Have you followed the rules, etc.? All those sorts of things. And I think that is where the Pharisees and the Sadducees thought, their train of thought went, and unfortunately that's where they got it wrong. They missed something really important. When Jesus says here that he will reward each person according to what they have done, what is the context in which he is speaking? Well, he is speaking in the context of picking up your cross and following him. He's talking about gaining the world and forfeiting your soul. And what did you do? They're the questions. Really, when Jesus says that each person will receive a reward according to what they have done, there are only two options, and they are the same ones we've been talking about, eternity and destruction. Jesus isn't saying here, if you follow every single rule every single day, you will be rewarded more. He isn't saying, if you give more or do more or act better or do better, you will get more. It's straightforward. Jesus is saying there are two options. Will you pick up your cross and follow him, or will you continue to live your own way? And this can be a hard reality to face, and when we are starting to talk to people about this, and we are wondering why people are not interested maybe in what we have to share about the gospel, in some ways I don't blame them if we started at that point. Like trying to explain to someone that really needs a larger context to really buy into something here. If we just start right there, we can't be surprised when people are confronted and think, well, this is all a bit strange. If I want to sell you on cricket, I'd probably have to start at 2020 cricket. I don't think I could start at a 5-day test match. I certainly couldn't start by telling you the bowling averages of Mitchell Johnson and Alan Donald and thinking that you would understand anything about what that means. I'd have to start at a place where you would be interested, where you'd want to hear. It's the same with the gospel message. Where do we start? And the disciples here, they were able to continue their journey of faith because they had journeyed with Jesus. They were able to build the church because they shared the message of Jesus and they shared it in full. They could be completely on the mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." Then the disciples heard this. They fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Do not be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. Now, having read this passage, we are not going to unpack all of the ins and outs of this now, because we'll be here for a really, really long time. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this passage. What I'm hoping to do here is help us see how this passage flows from chapter 16 and almost completes this really interesting train of thought. Because as we read this, again, we are given some words, a story that is pretty unbelievable. We have Jesus shining and talking to Moses and Elijah, the voice of God, and then it all goes back to normal when Jesus touches the disciples. Was this all just a fever dream? Was this some kind of communal hallucination? This does seem strange. Or is it strange? Why should we believe that this is an actual moment in history and not just dismiss it? Well, there is a clear reason why I think that the Transfiguration can be pretty easily believed as a supernatural moment. And it all plays into what we already know. It's because of Jesus' ministry so far. Again, the theme here seems to be understanding who Jesus is and why all of this is happening. So if this is the first you were hearing of Jesus, then yes, it can seem fairly unbelievable. But if you've been with us for the last 16 chapters, you would have heard us talk about Jesus healing. He's performed miracles. He's fed thousands with not much food at all. This doesn't actually seem that out of place. And it was funny because at the start of the week when I spoke to Mike, I said, "How am I going to explain this? Because this story is crazy." But it isn't. It doesn't seem out of place at all in his ministry. It actually seems like something quite amazing and something that points towards him as our Saviour. As we have said, it was the natural progression of his mission. Jesus has announced his final act in his ministry, that he is to die and rise again. And to follow that up with his disciples, they are shown a truly incredible scene. Jesus glowing, speaking to Elijah and Moses, and God endorsing his own son. The Transfiguration is not just some strange shining moment in the Bible where we get to say, "Oh, that's just Jesus doing Jesus things." It actually ties everything we have read together. They can believe what the Son of Man has come to do. And while it's sometimes hard to understand or fathom or even pull apart, all work to equip the church in the mission of sharing and declaring the love of God. So Jesus tells Peter that the church will be built on him. And that charge is given to us too. The church has never been about a big fancy building or the things inside it. The church has always been about its people. And that if the church is built on people, the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Because as long as the church is built on God's people, the church will continue to grow. the church will continue to share his message. If we let other things take the place of that, then perhaps, yes, the gates of Hades will overcome. But as long as the church is doing its work as the people, well, we won't see, will continue to be a rock. Our temptation, like Peter, will be to think that we know what is best. Our human temptations will get in the way of growing the church at times. It'll get in the way of growing our personal relationships with others at times. But if we are to believe the story of the death and resurrection, and we believe that we need to pick up our cross and follow Jesus, leaving the life we think is better behind us, then the transfiguration and that promise that we get to see is something that is really quite amazing for us to share in. We get to leave the life that we think is better behind us and actually pick up our cross and follow Jesus. We get to share in the death and resurrection. And even as we talk about this stuff, again, if you're here this morning and you're brand new to all this, it does sound strange. But I guarantee you, if you talk to some people after the service, they will be so encouraged by the stories that they have shared over the years and the stories they've seen of people who have denied the thing that they think is better and actually followed Jesus. They'll hear stories of times that was tough. But they'll tell stories and share to you the truth that they believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And that, like we see in this story, he is going to do what he says he'll do. And he has done it for us. So what do we do with this during our week? Well, I think it can be as simple as believing that this can be trusted. If this is something brand new to you, can I encourage you, read through Matthew. Have a read of some of those amazing things that Jesus has done. Flick to the other Gospels and see how they all line up. This isn't just a strange story that was written by one person. The Bible isn't just something that was written in one go, in one point of time. These are all stories that come together over a long period of time to attest to the truth of God and to attest to the truth of Jesus. And if we try and wrap that up in just going, oh, well, verse 16 is difficult to understand, well, we lose the beauty of everything and the history of the journey to the cross. Flicking back through the Bible and seeing if this all lines up. Is this something that you would like to buy into? Is this something you would like to pick up and carry along with others? Do you need to take something away from this week in the way that you share the message of Jesus? Are you starting too far in? I know I've been guilty of that more than once. Just assuming people will understand what I'm talking about. And we have a great message to share. So at the very least, I hope that this week, as we wrestle with that, picking up the cross and carrying it, it means that we won't do nothing at all. As we sing our closing song, and I'll ask the team to come up, we are going to reflect on this. We're singing How Deep the Father's Love for Us. And again, hindsight means that we know the end of the story. We are not at the end of the gospel story yet in our teaching. And while the death and resurrection shows the deep, deep love God has for us, this story right now that we've just read, all he has for us. We get to see God's plan playing out. And as we sing this song, that is the ending of the plan. So as we sing it, maybe you would like to just reflect on the words. Maybe you would like to reflect on the week you've had. Maybe you would like to pray. Maybe you'd like to pray with someone together, and we are going to sing.